Hello fellow woodworkers, welcome to this week's edition of the Garage Workshop on a beautiful sunny morning. In this week's edition of the Garage Workshop we're going to be making a new storage station for my drills. Roll the intro. So, a while ago on the channel, I made a drill sort of storage holding unit, and I'm going to be honest with you, I'll put a link to it here in case you want to see it. I've never really been happy with it. I've never really been happy with the way I made it because there are some quite big gaps which you can see here. And also, I made it to potentially fit on something else. It was never designed to be on the wall in the place it is originally, and I just don't like it. It just feels a bit clunky. It doesn't feel very well made, and every time I look at it I just think, oh, really not sure about that unit. So in this week's video we're going to start by taking that unit apart, and we're going to use all the pieces of wood and see if we can make a smaller, better unit. Let's do that now. So the first stage for this project was to clear all the stuff off this woodworking shelf and take it down. One of the things you can probably see already is it's very far up, and when I fixed it on the wall I think I fixed it too high, which didn't help. But I want something to go smaller in that space that you can see there. Now when I took it apart I was very careful how I did this, because as I said a minute ago, I really wanted to make sure that I kept all of this wood, because essentially this was the wood I'm going to use to rebuild it. I mean, in the end I did need another little piece which you'll see later, but I wanted to make sure that when I took it apart I got everything off. And actually I hadn't remembered, but it wasn't as put together as well as I thought it was going to be. A lot of the shelving, well, all the shelves were held up with these little metal L-shaped brackets, which in itself is, you know, fine, but they didn't look great. And actually what I did was I didn't screw it from both sides. I pinned it with my nail gun, which on reflection, you know, may not have been the greatest choice. I then took all those L brackets off, and I had the wood and I was good to go. Okay, so now the unit's apart, I've got these two top pieces. I thought at first I'd use pocket holes. There are pocket holes drilled in them, and I can't remember, I have to go back and look at the footage for why I didn't. But as you can see, particularly on this piece, when I made that groove, it was very uneven, and I think I noticed at the time and thought, oh, it's not going to matter because it's just on the wall. But over time it has bugged me more and more. So I've got these two top and bottom pieces, because obviously it was sort of in a portrait mode. But what I'm going to do is have the unit sitting this way. Now there's a couple of things that I want to put in place on this unit which weren't in place before. The first thing is I want to leave space for just a very thin drawer, just a small thin drawer, because I tend to have loads of little like drill bits or bit holders and little bits and bobs like that hanging around. And mainly my drill bits are kept in a different place, but I'd like to have a better sort of place for storing them than where they currently are. So I am going to leave space for a little drawer unit at the bottom. And the other thing is I'm going to put in spaces so that my drills can hang underneath, either like that or via the body. So I'm going to put sort of a set of inserts in the bottom to get the drill bits in. It's going to go in the same space as it was before, but obviously I'm going to have to adapt and cut this wood to fit it. So what I'm going to do now is take some really good measurements of exactly the space I've got, because it's sort of fairly narrow, but it's also fairly deep, so it's going to go above the sander. So I'm going to take those measurements now. This wood is pretty much reusable. I am going to have to denail it on the end, and I am going to have to chop the two ends off, because they've obviously got the broken wood from where I've taken it apart. But that isn't a big issue at all, and it's actually quite nice wood, this plywood. So that's what I'm going to do now. Next stage, measure, see exactly how much I've got to play with, and then I'll come up with a little design of what I exactly want to do. So let's measure that now. Okay, so this is the design I've gone for. My outdoor box shape. The gap is actually 50 centimetres in that space, but I've cut it down to 40 just to give me a bit of wriggle room. And the entire thing from start to finish is 40 centimetres. So this is the drawer unit and the handle that I'm going to have in there. This is just going to be a storage unit. Excuse me. And along the bottom, these are the 4 holders for the drills. Now, obviously on this picture, which is only a sketch, I haven't got them measured them out and got them exactly to scale. And what I'm going to do is wait until I've made the outside edge of the box before I actually figure out how I'm going to do these and exactly what the spacings are going to be, because one of my drills is really small, my Aldi one, so it's not going to need that massive space. And what I suspect is when I do this, I'll put 4 side by side and I'll have a bigger gap at the end, which will give me an opportunity to put something else in. So this is the plan, this is the design. Not like me, I've actually done a proper draw this time. So let's get cracking. What I need to do now is cut out this shape and then make the 2 shapes down the side, because obviously this piece of wood are going to be 40 centimetres and this piece across is 48. So let's do that now. Okay, so I'm just about to cut the wood to level it off with my Parkside track saw, but I just wanted to give a little bit of a shout out. You know, I like to give as many helpful tips as I can on this channel, and I've got here at the back, this is a crane 10 kilogram dumbbell weight, and you might be thinking, well, why is that here? Well, this is here to help weight stuff out. So when I'm gluing, I use it to compress bits of wood or whatever I'm gluing together. And it also works as a really nice counterbalance weight for when I'm cutting things. And the reason that I mention this is being filmed around the 15th of October 2022, and at the moment a lot of these products, the crane fitness products in Aldi, are on sale. This single 10 kilogram dumbbell weight, I actually picked it up for £3, which is absolutely nothing. That's cheaper than buying scrap wood, and it's worked really, really well. So just a little tip there, if you are on your travels and you're going through Aldi, don't ignore other parts of the middle, because there are always some really good bargains in it. So that's my tip for this video. Let's get on with the cutting. I know what you're thinking, and no, I'm not going to say how amazing my Parkside saw is, but it is. But actually, one thing I forgot to do here, which is another handy little tip. I'm all about tips in this video. I didn't recalibrate the depth of the blade, as you can see. So it was just left over from the last time I used it. So it cut through most of the wood, but it just wasn't quite deep enough to cut through all. So when I've made that adjustment, I finished with the cut, and then obviously I got the other pieces of wood and just duplicated this cut on the other side with my fantastic saw. Okay, so I've now finished making the cuts, as you'll have seen. I just went back to the design and I noticed a huge error, which is not like me. You watch this channel, you know I usually make the error first and then realise afterwards. But when I looked at it, I haven't allowed for the clearance of the hanging drill bodies. So when they hang on, obviously there's a space underneath them where they hang, and I haven't allowed for that. Luckily, I've picked it up now. So what I'm going to do to get around that, I've got this other piece of plywood, which is actually from the same sheet that I used to make the drill press. This has been lying around in the workshop for ages. I'm going to cut this in half and make the sides shorter. Now this is about 32, I think 32 centimetres, so I'm going to cut it in half to give me 16. It will still give me enough clearance for my drawer, and it will still give me a little bit of storage at the top, but it will also reduce quite a long way the space. It will give me about 14 centimetres, which is what I need really for the hanging drill. So I'm going to cut this in half and then I can start to put it across. Now these are different widths. This is different to that width by about 3 or 4 centimetres. So at first I thought, oh, I'll cut these down to match it, but actually it's going to give me a little bit of an overhang, and I quite like the idea of having that. So I'm going to cut it first, then I'm going to dry fit it and see, but I'm tempted to keep it as it is. I don't actually mind that overhang. I think it might be quite useful somewhere in the future. So let's make a cut, get this cut in half now, dry fit it, and let's see where we're up to. Just one thing I noticed here, this the piece of rail guide here has got a nick in it, in the rubber that you trim off. I'm not sure what the correct name is for that. So if anyone watching this video knows where I can get more of them, particularly for the park side, I'd much appreciate it, because there is quite a dink in it now, and I would ideally like to get that replaced, as it just makes it harder to follow the plane of the saw. The next stage was to just do a dry fit, really, and when I did this, obviously I knew the bit at the top and the bottom were wider, and I was a bit unsure about how I was going to feel about it. But when I'd actually dry fit it together, I really liked it. It's almost like its own little feature, and definitely something that I'm glad I kept. So when that was done, it was just a case of making all the marks for the pocket holes, and yes, here comes the Garage Workshop pocket hole section. Haven't had one for a while, to be fair to me. I haven't used pocket holes a lot, but I got every piece of wood and I just went pocket hole mad, even on the cleat, because obviously the French cleat that you can see me doing there is going to be affixed differently, because it was side to side, and now it's going to be fixed from the back. So I just got all the pieces of wood, got the pocket hole out, and away I went. It was great fun, and I do like to include a good old bit of pocket holing in my videos for those of you out there that like it, unless I'm the only one, in which case let's just never mention that again. But I got all the holes done, and then I was ready to fix the unit together. Now, this next stage was the stage that I realised I'd made a very big mistake, and I recorded a really nice, long, detailed piece to camera where I explained what the mistake was, but for some reason my GoPro went from one to another, one sort of file to another, and I lost it. So essentially I realised here that the lengths that I was hoping to do were too long if I was then going to attach the drills hanging from the bottom. If you see what I mean, and that's not a great explanation, but essentially if I had it this deep and then I hung the drills from the bottom, I haven't allowed enough space for the drills to drop down and hang down. Otherwise they're going to interfere with my belt sander, which is underneath. And I realised that at this point. And like I said, I did record an explanation, but it's been lost. But I did realise at this point that, oh, hold on a minute, I'm actually going to need to take this up a little bit in order for me to fit the drills underneath it, and for when they hang to leave enough clearance between that and the sander that's sat underneath it. So luckily for me, and very unusually for me as well, I actually realised this during the making, so I had the time to change it, which normally I make the mistake and then think, oh, and I have to go back and think of a workaround or take stuff apart, which is never very good. So when I'd fixed it all together and I put in the second part of the French cleat that's going to hold it onto the wall, I then moved on to the next stage, which was the internal shelves, which luckily for me fitted. Now I did have two, you'll see there were two here, and actually only one made the final cut, as it were, because I'd decided at this point not to go with the drawer, and as a result I didn't really need that second shelf, because that second shelf was basically just for the drawer to rest on. So I actually abandoned it. I have kept it, and at some point I might want to add something else or put that shelf back in on the top. I don't know. If I want to do that, I've got the piece of wood, I'll keep it. So that's definitely not a problem. But what you can see there is actually the way it turned out with the plywood, which was essentially the bottom, ending up being the bottom shelf, which I actually in the end mount the drills to. Okay, so I've put in a couple of spacers from that shelf. I've still got the other shelf in the middle, but what I need to do when I've made these bits is just decide whether I want that whole section at the top to be drawer, because I do want to put a drawer in here, because I'd like to have something that I can take in and out. So I need to decide whether that whole section is going to be a drawer, or whether I'm going to put a very skinny drawer in it. To be honest with you, at the moment my feeling is that will end up either being a drawer, or I'll completely abandon the idea. So I put these two spacers in either side, and now I've just lined the drills up roughly where they're going to hang, and I've decided to reclaim this amount of space because I'm really worried about how low they'll be. And one thing I don't do, which I probably should to be honest, is when I store my drills in between builds, I never take the batteries off, which to be fair I probably should, but I know I'll forget to do it. So what I'm now going to do is put some sections in here that will attach here, and they're literally going to be sort of like T-shapes. That's literally it. So that's why this drawer's not fixed on. So I'm just going to make a sort of mark on here so I know roughly where I want them to be. And then I'm just going to make some that dangle down with like a T-bit at the bottom to keep them in. So that's the next part of the plan. I'll do that now. So the next stage for me was really simply assembling a stop block. What's that piece of wood you can see there is my normal drilling wood. So essentially I created a stop block which gave me my 4 sort of downward slots, like the sort of shaft of the T, if you see what I mean. You'll see a bit more in a minute. But these 4 slots, I put them in against the piece of wood, and then I realized one of them was the right size and 2 of them weren't, so I soon corrected that, and I had 3 pieces that were identical in size. The next thing I did was drill the holes and hooked on, and you can't see it from this, apologies, it's not great filming that, but essentially what I did was I put the side bracket in first, and this is the one that's sort of the other side of the T. You'll see a bit more in a minute, but I wanted to get that in first, so I'd marked it exactly where I wanted it to be. I just popped in a screw at the top and the bottom, and what you can't see around the other side is there's a piece of wood, a spacer. I then went back to the miter saw, slightly different stop block this time, and this is the bottom. I had the shaft of the T I showed you earlier. This is the sort of bottom, the stroke across the top of the T. So these bits are going to sit on the other pieces of wood. That's a terrible explanation, but you'll see what I mean. There you can see now. So those bits I've just cut are the bit that's on the top, and what you can't see here is I marked the wood at either end, so I lined the wood up with the marking on the side. I'm not just sort of doing this by eye. You probably could do it by eye, but I wanted to get it more precise, so I'd marked the wood on both sides. You can just see me there lining it up and making sure it's in the right place, and then I was able to fix them, and that way I just made sure I had the continuity of the same space all the way along, and as you can see they sort of look like a T shape. So when I'd done that and I was happy with how it looked, I just offered it up to the inside, and it looked absolutely fine. So the next process was just to basically redo that again for all of the other ones. Now a little bit of apology here because I thought the camera was pointing up a bit higher, and really all you can see is the DeWalt drill. I thought you'd be able to see me sort of figuring it around, but all I'm doing there really is just getting it in the right place, and I'm using a pencil to mark where the line's going to be, so when I come to hook it together I know exactly where it's going to be. So when that was done, it was just a case of them moving on and doing exactly the same thing for all of the other pieces until eventually all of them were done. And again, I'd pre-marked all of this wood. I didn't want to leave anything to chance, and I wanted to get them as neat and as straight as humanly possible. And at least this time you can see them a bit better anyway. So I'm looking for some screws here. I didn't want to put too deep of screws in it because, you know, when you screw into plywood it does have a tendency, even if it's pre-drilled, you can quite often split it, and I wanted to make sure that I really didn't do that, because these bits of wood were the only bits of wood I had left by this point. I'd sort of cut them all down to nothing, and luckily I had one spare piece of plywood left from this build actually, which just gave me enough to do some of the sort of drill hangers that you can see there. But once it was hooked on, off camera what you can't see is I'm just lining them up and I'm just marking them up, so I know that the shelf that they're going to fix to, I know exactly the correct place to put them on. This did take a bit of fiddling, as you can see, off camera fiddling. There's nothing we like more than off camera fiddling, and there's a bit of thinking, but I did line it up, and I spent a lot of time just making sure it was exactly dead square and dead level, because A, you're going to see it and it will look horrible, and B, if they're not lined up properly, then you're going to have problems getting the actual body of the drill in and out, and I really wanted to avoid those problems. So fortunately it's a bit easier to see from this angle. Basically what I've been doing, I just used those clamps to keep them there exactly where I wanted them, and I just checked the measurements to make sure they were the right width. Now the one on the right hand side is slightly smaller, but when I say slightly smaller, I mean it is slightly smaller. And that's just to allow essentially for my work zone, my park side little mini sort of screwdriver drill. It is meant to be a drill, but to be honest, I never use it for that. So when I did that, I carefully took that section out. They're all exactly where they should be, and all still there, all still clamped up. And apart from a little wibble there, which I managed to straighten, it was just a case then of pre-drilling all the holes. I started off by drilling the ones at the back after I'd remembered to get the screws out. So I sunk a drill in at the back, pre-drilled. When I was happy on both sides, I could take the clamp off and then go in from the top. I did this a little bit by eye. You can't see, there is a sort of rough marking on the top, but I did just do it by eye because I just felt some of the lines weren't 100% in the middle. And like I said, this has got to be precise because it's going to be hanging on the wall. I'm going to see it every day. You're probably going to see it every time you watch one of the videos. And I wanted it to be neat, and I wanted it to be honest with you, I just wanted to make it really good and as good as I could make it. So when I'd hooked it all together and I was really happy, I then put this bit back in, and the last stage really is to connect this bit, or connect the shelf that's got these sort of hangers in it. Okay, so the unit is made. I've made all of the double units. It's now the correct space. I have got pocket holes here on this side. As you can see, I'm not actually sure if I'm going to use them at the moment. And the other thing I have decided is I was going to put a drawer unit in the top, but to be honest with you, I'm just not going to do that. I think that space at the top is so handy that I'll be able to get all of my drill bits and everything in there, my boxes of drill bits, which I'd much rather do. So the next thing to do is to just attach this, and then hopefully it's the end of the project with a bit of luck. So let's do that now. So the last stage was just to get the pocket hole screws and just hook it together. I'm using the proper pocket hole screws here. I do need to get some more of these because mine are all one length. I think they're 35mm, which is just enough for 18mm, but sometimes the very end just breaks through depending on how well you've drilled it. So I hooked it together, took the stands off, and we were done. So here it is. And I have to say, I'm very pleased. It's turned out exactly as I thought it was going to be, which is unusual for my projects. And after last week's fail, I'm particularly pleased. It's a little bit wonky on the top, I think. I've used the French cleat to attach it. So what I'm going to do is just put a bracket in at the top just to make sure it's nice and secure. But it's exactly as I wanted it to be, and all of my drills fit in it perfectly. So there's plenty of room for the batteries to hang as well, and there's enough space on the top here that I can get all of my drill bit storage in. So overall, I'm really pleased, and actually it fits quite nicely in there, and it's given me a bit of space at the top where I can potentially put some other stuff. So really, really pleased. If this is your first time at the Garage Workshop, thank you so much for watching. Please can I ask you to subscribe, like and comment. If you're a regular viewer, I hope you enjoyed this week's video. And again, don't forget to like and comment. I'll catch you on next week's episode. Take care, fellow woodworkers.